When one of her lovers was unfaithful to her, with a single word, she turned him into a beaver because when they are afraid of being caught, beavers escape their pursuers by biting off their balls. The idea being that something like that would happen to him. An innkeeper who was a neighbor and therefore a trade rival, she changed into a frog, and now the poor old chap swims around in a barrel of his own wine and graces old customers with a polite crook as he squats there in the lees. Another time, she changed a lawyer who appeared against her in court into a ram, and it's as a ram that he now pleads his cases. Again, the wife of another of her lovers, she condemned to perpetual pregnancy for being witty at her expense. She shut up her woman's womb and halted the growth of the fetus so that it's now 8 years we've all done the sum that this unfortunate creature has been swollen with her burden as if it was an elephant that she was going to produce. This sort of thing kept happening, and a lot of people suffered at her hands, so that public indignation grew and spread, and a meeting was held at which it was decided that on the following day she should receive drastic punishment by stoning to death. However, she thwarted this move by the strength of her spells, just like the famous Medea when, having obtained a single day's grace from Creton, she used it to burn up the old king's palace, his daughter, and himself with a crown of fire. Just so, Meron sacrificed into a trench to the powers of darkness. She told me all this the other day when she was drunk, and shut up the whole population in their houses by silent supernatural force. For 2 whole days, they couldn't undo their bolts or get their doors open or even break through their walls until in the end they came to an agreement among themselves and all called out, swearing by what they held most sacred, that they would not lay a finger on her, and that if anyone had other ideas, they would come to her assistance. So she was appeased and led them all off, except for the man who had convened the public meeting. Him she whisked off at dead of night, with his whole house, walls, foundations, the ground he stood on, still shut up 100 miles away to another town which was situated on the top of a rocky and waterless mountain. And since the houses there were too closely packed to allow rooms for another one, she simply dumped it outside the town gate and decamped. My dear Socrates, I said, what you tell me is ghastly as is astonishing. You really have made me very uneasy. No, you've terrified me. It's not just a pinprick of anxiety, but a positive spear thrust that you've inflicted. The fear that the old woman may invoke some supernatural aid as she's done before to drop on this conversation. So let's get to bed straight away, and when we've slept off our fatigue, let's get as far as possible away from here before it's light. Before I had finished offering this advice, my friend, who had been tried to the limit by so many wearing experiences and more wine than he was used to, was fast asleep and snoring noisily. So I closed the door and shut the bolts firmly, and also wedged my bed hard up against the hinges and lay down on it. At first, my fear kept me awake for a time, but then, about midnight, I dropped off. Hardly had I done so when, hardly had I done so when suddenly, you wouldn't think a whole gang of robbers could manage such an onslaught. The door was thrown open, or rather broken down, and torn right off its hinges, and sent crashing to the ground. My bed, which was on a cot, with a foot missing and riddled with worm, was overturned by this violent shock, and I was hauled out of it and rolled onto the floor, with the bed upside down and on top of me and hiding me. Then I discovered that some emotions naturally express themselves by their opposites. Just as one very often weeps tears of joy, so then, utterly terrified as I was, I couldn't help laughing at the idea of myself as a tortoise. Groveling there in the dirt, I was able, from under the protection of my resourceful bed, to get a sideways view of what was happening. I saw two elderly women, one carrying a lighted lamp, the other a sponge and a naked sword. So arrayed, they stood on either side of Socrates, who was still sound asleep. The one with the sword spoke first. "There he is, Sister Panthea, my beloved Endymion, my Ganymede, who by night and day has played fast and loose with my tender youth, who scorns my love, and not content with calumniating me, is trying to escape me. I take it I'm supposed to play abandoned Calypso to his wily Ulysses, left to mourn in perpetual solitude." And then she pointed and indicated me to Panthea. But here we have our friend Aristomenes, the counselor, who is the author of this escape plan, and now lies on the ground under that bed, within a hair's breadth of death, watching all this and thinking that the injuries he has done me will go unpunished. One day, what am I saying now? This very moment, I will make him sorry for his past impudence and his present curiosity. Hearing this, I was in agony, drenched in an icy sweat and shaking all over, so that the bed too was convulsed by my shudders and heaved up and down on top of me. Then said the amiable Panthea, "Now, sister, shall we take this one first and tear him limb from limb, like Bacchantes, or tie him down and castrate him?" But Meroe, for she it was, as I realized from what Socrates had told me, said, "No, let him survive, to give a modest burial to the body of his poor friend." And twisting Socrates' head to one side, she buried her sword up to the hilt in the left-hand side of his throat, catching the blood that spurted out in a leather bottle, so neatly that not a drop was spilled. This I saw with my own eyes. Next, there Moroy, wanting, I suppose, to keep as closely as possible to the sacrificial forms, plunged her hand into the wound right down his entrail, rummaged about, and pulled out my poor friend's heart. At this, he let out through the wound in his throat, which the violent stroke of the sword has totally swept, an inarticulate whistling sound, and gave up the ghost. Then Panthea, blocking the gaping wound with her sponge. Now, sponge, she said, you were born in the sea. Take care not to cross a river. With these words, they left. But first, they pulled the bed off me and squatted down and emptied their bladders over my face, leaving me soaked in their filthy piss. The moment they had gone, the door reverted to normal. The hinges flew back into position. The bars returned to the doorposts, and the belts shot back into the slot. As for me, I remained where I was, groveling on the floor, fainting, naked, cold, and drenched in piss, just like a newborn child, or rather half dead, a posthumous survival of myself, an absolutely certain candidate for crucifixion. What's going to happen to me, I said to myself, when he is found in the morning with his throat cut? I can tell the truth, but who will believe me? I can hear them now. Couldn't you at least have called for help if you couldn't cope with a woman, a big chap like you? A man murdered before your eyes and not a peep out of you? And how is it that you weren't likewise made away with by these female desperadoes? Why should their cruelty have spared a witness who could inform against them? So you escaped death. Now go back to him. While I was going over this in my mind again and again, the night wore on. The best plan then seemed to be to get clear surreptitiously before dawn and to take the road, though I had no very clear idea where to go. So I shouldered my luggage and tried to undo the bolts. But the upright and conscientious door, which earlier had unbarred itself so readily, now only opened with much reluctance, and after many turning of the keys. Then, "Hey, porter," I called, "where are you? Open the front door. I want to be off early." The porter was lying on the ground behind the door and was still half asleep. "Have some sense," he said. "Don't you know the roads are stiff with robbers, and you want to start out at this time of night? You may have some crimes on your conscience that makes you eager to die, but I'm not such a fat head as to want to take your place." "It's nearly light," I said, "and anyway, what can robbers take away from a traveler who's got nothing? Don't be stupid. You know that 10 wrestlers can't strip a naked man." But he, drowsy and half asleep, turned over in bed and muttered, "Anyway, how do I know you haven't murdered your companion that you came in with last night and aren't trying to save yourself by doing a bunk?" At that moment, I remembered I saw the earth opening and the depths of hell and Cerberus hungering for me, and I realized it wasn't in pity that their old Meroy had spared my life, but in a spirit of sadism, saving me from the cross. So I went back to my room to mull over the form my suicide was to take. since the only lethal weapon provided by fortune was my bed. Now, now, O bed, I cried, my dearest bed, thou who hast endowed me with so many sufferings, confidant and beholder of the nice happenings, the only witness to my innocence that I can call against my accusers. Do provide me as I hasten to the shades with a weapon that shall save me. With these words, I set about undoing the cord with which it was strung, and made one end of it fast to a beam which jutted out under the window. The other end I knotted firmly into noose, and then climbing on the bed and mounting to my doom, I put my head into the halter. But when I kicked the support away, so that the rope tightened round my throat by my weight should cut off the function of my breathing, at that moment the rotten old rope broke, and I fell from where I was standing onto Socrates.